I used to be a skinny fat kid because I couldn't control myself when it came to eating junk food. I'm now at the point where I haven't touched junk food in over a year, not even once, and it's gotten me ripped. So, binge eating was my biggest problem. The reason I was skinny fat was because I just kept on eating junk food. It would never stop. And I knew whilst eating that junk food that was the reason I was skinny fat. It was the reason why I had a flabby stomach. It was the reason I had love handles. It was the reason why kids at school called me fat. But yet I couldn't cut it out. I couldn't just stop eating junk food because it's not as simple as that. The real issue is dopamine regulation. So back when I was in high school, around 14, 15, 16 years old, that was when I was skinny fat. And what I would do was come home from school every day. And the first thing I did after walking into the house was put my bag down and go straight to the kitchen, open up the pantry, and pull out a whole packet of chips. And I would literally just stand in the kitchen, eating the chips directly from the packet into my mouth whilst I was watching YouTube videos. And I couldn't stop myself. It was like every time I walked through my front door coming home from school, it was just this automatic routine that would happen to me. Put my bag down, go straight to the kitchen, open up the pantry, and start eating whatever junk food was in the pantry. I couldn't help it. Now, the reason for that was because I had high baseline dopamine levels. So when I was back at school, I would just always be seeking comfort. There was never anything that I was doing with my life that was actually very hard. So when I was 15, school doesn't really matter that much. You only really have to pay attention in school in the final years of your schooling life. And when you're 14, 15, you're like in year 8, year 9, year 10, those are the years that don't really matter. So I wasn't studying very hard. I wasn't really playing any sport either. I wasn't doing anything physically demanding like running or training or going to the gym. I was waking up late, and all I was really doing with my life was waking up, going to school and doing nothing, not even studying because I didn't have to, coming home and just eating. That was literally my life. There was nothing hard. There was nothing difficult about what I was doing. And what that meant was that if I was ever faced with doing anything difficult, then it was completely out of reach for me because all I was doing was watching YouTube videos, playing games with my friends on the PlayStation and the Xbox. And so what that means is you need even more and more dopamine, more and more stimulation to actually make yourself feel satisfied. So baseline dopamine is just an amount of dopamine that's consistently being released in your brain. When those levels are high, it means that anything you do in life that gives your brain dopamine is either going to be higher or lower than the amount of dopamine that's already in your brain. So if you have high baseline dopamine levels, what that means is ordinary things, everyday things that occur to you in life don't actually provide you with as much joy as they otherwise would if your baseline levels were lower. So the buzz you get from normal everyday things and the enjoyment you get out of those things decreases the higher your baseline is. And you can see this all the time with people on the train when I'm commuting to work. So there's two people. There's the typical young person that's on their commute to work or to university on the train. And what they're doing is they're on their phone, scrolling TikTok every 2 seconds. They need new video to stimulate their attention. They've got these huge headphones on, which are either playing music or being the sound for the TikTok. And so they are absolutely stimulated. Compare that to the old guy that sits on the train. He has no AirPods, no headphones, not looking at a phone. He's just sitting there in silence, looking out the window. And when those two people get to work, the guy that is sitting there on the train, doing nothing, just looking out the window, is going to have so much more of a pleasurable experience at work because his experience on the train was probably so boring. Whereas the person that was on their phone, scrolling TikTok every 2 seconds, and had music playing in their ears while that was happening, when they get off the train and have to go to work and face the reality of an 8-hour shift where they're probably bored out of their mind, they're going to absolutely hate it because they don't have access to this constant dopamine, this constant stimulation where they can scroll every 2 seconds and get some new boost of buzz in their brain. And the same logic applies to you binge eating food. When that old guy goes home, he can easily have a steak, have a salad, have vegetables, fruits, and be completely fine with that because his day has been, in comparison, quite boring. Whereas the person that was on TikTok for that entire commute has now gone home and needs even more stimulation to keep themselves going. So eating a steak, eating fruits, eating vegetables for the person that was on TikTok the whole train journey is going to seem like so much harder of a thing to do because they've spent their whole commute just being constantly flooded with dopamine in their brain. And so eating the steak, the fruit, the vegetables, in comparison to those high baseline dopamine levels is actually a step below. And so it's so much harder to actually do something like that. Whereas when your baseline dopamine levels are lower, eating the steak, the fruit, and the vegetables is so much nicer of an experience because it's relatively providing you with more dopamine than you otherwise would have been. And so you can compare that to a guy that is literally self-flagellating. If you're just constantly seeking out pain, and it sounds weird to say, but if you're constantly just trying to do hard things with your life, so if you wake up early in the morning when you're just tired and you can't be bothered getting out of bed, but you do it anyway, and then you go straight into a cold shower, and then you go straight into meditating, and then you go straight into a workout where you're pushing yourself to failure, and then you come home, you've just pushed yourself so hard and had such a difficult morning that everything else for the rest of your day is going to seem a lot easier. So that person doesn't need any new dopamine stimulus from junk food, from eating chips, eating biscuits, eating chocolates, because they're completely fine with having the steak, the fruits, and the vegetables. Because in comparison to what they've done in the morning, that is such a pleasurable experience. Eating the steak is such a beautiful experience in comparison to that troublesome morning of getting up early, having a cold shower, meditating, and working out extremely hard. So it's so much easier to control yourself with junk food because you feel like you don't need it and you feel like you get all the dopamine you need out of food from foods that are clean. You don't need to turn to the chips, to the chocolate, like I was when I was coming back from school, when I was doing nothing hard with my life, because I was just seeking out comfort. I wanted dopamine from somewhere. And because my life was so easy, that's where I got it from. The higher amount of dopamine is what you're always going to be seeking out. And if you can just lower your baseline levels so that anything that you're seeking out that's above it is still good for you, i.e. the steak, the fruits, the vegetables, that means you're going to be having a hell of a lot easier time eating clean and avoiding the junk foods when you've adopted that approach. Now, I also have a whole module video course on how you can stop binge eating with a range of other techniques beyond just this dopamine regulation issue. I also talk about things like mindset and how you can actually train your mind to be able to stick to the habits that are going to transform your physique from skinny fat to jacked. And you can check that out in the top link in the description. So your body is always seeking out some form of comfort. And that comfort is going to be in the form of you getting dopamine from something that is slightly above your baseline levels. And if you can make your baseline levels low enough to the point where the thing that's above your baseline dopamine levels are still healthy eating habits, then you're going to be able to eat clean 100% of the time and you will beat any cravings that you have for junk food. So you essentially need to detox yourself from all of these high dopamine activities that are cheap, that are instant gratification activities. Because when you perform and engage in those cheap gratification activities, like scrolling TikTok, Instagram Reels. You find it so difficult to do something that's going to give you lower dopamine than whatever it is you were doing before, like scrolling TikTok and getting something new, getting some new stimulus every 6 seconds from a new video. So if you can instead make your life harder, go have a cold shower every morning. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. Go to the gym every morning and push yourself to failure. Yeah, again, it's uncomfortable. Wake up early, meditate, give yourself 5 minutes in the morning where you just sit there in silence. You don't have to think about your breath or anything. Literally just sit there and see if you can go 5 minutes with no external stimuli. Because if you're able to do that and train that skill up, you're going to be able to better regulate your dopamine levels. You're not going to need any external stimuli to make you feel comfortable. If you can sit there in silence, like that guy on the train that has no AirPods in and he's not looking at his phone and he's just looking at the window, then that experience is relatively so much more boring compared to eating clean. And so eating clean is something that's actually enjoyable. So when you do all of these difficult activities, especially when you do them in the morning, you're setting the rest of your day up to be extremely easy in comparison to that morning that you had. And I think this is the key reason why I've been able to literally not eat junk food in over a year. Over 1 year, people binge eat daily. People have McDonald's every day, KFC, Krispy Kreme, some kind of junk food, literally every single day. And I've been able to go without it for over a year. And I'm telling you, the biggest reason how I've been able to do that is because I have these really difficult mornings where I'm training, where I'm having cold showers, where I'm waking up early, where I'm meditating. And so my baseline dopamine has just come down so low. I'm that guy that sits in the train and just looks out the window with no AirPods in. And so everything else in comparison to the normal hard morning that I live is in comparison just so much easier. And one of the components that goes into my day being easier is eating clean. I don't feel the need to go to McDonald's or eat Doritos or anything like that anymore. And it's because I'm doing harder things with my life. So hopefully that's actually given you a bit of insight as to how you can tackle your binge eating junk food problem. And that honestly is probably one of the biggest things that helped me with weight loss and transforming my physique from skinny fat to jacked. And again, I have all of the knowledge that you might need to undergo that transformation yourself. And that's the first link in the description, which is the skinny fat solution. If you enjoyed this video or learned anything from it, please consider subscribing. We're getting to 20K subs soon, and I'll see you in the next one.